Okay, this is the last video in this module, and although we we only looked at medieval period, showing you some cathedrals, the medieval period was 1,000 years, starting from rebuilding Europe up until the Renaissance. So for 1,000 years, everything is faith-based. It's called the Age of Reason. Excuse me, the Age of Faith. The opposite of, it's not the Age of Reasoning, it's the Age of Faith. And everything, all the subjects are religious. The church, what goes into churches. This is the period when you have serfs and you have kingdoms and you have, Romeo and Juliet, those kind of things. So this is, as we leave the medieval, also called the Dark Ages, and we move into the Renaissance, and we're around 1400. It is the rebirth of humanism, and that's what this unit is about. And something very important too, which is we're going to look at how classical and Hellenistic Greek keeps repeating itself in Western history in other periods. It's going to be very significant, and that's why knowing the Greeks, the classical and the Hellenistic, was actually very important. So we're leaving the Gothic period, and we're moving. How do you move from 1,000 years of faith-based into back to the rationale? Now, Renaissance is still very, very faith-based culture in Europe, but how do you do that? Well, interestingly enough, they do it through a subject called the Madonna and Child, which you see here. And there's all these Madonna and Child paintings that you see also on Christmas stamps, pretty traditionally. Now they're more multicultural, but Mary was a woman, and so she is that transitional figure from Virgin Mother to giving birth to Christ. So that she's the transitional. She's the one that brings us to humanism, because of that she is a woman. And of course, it's a great love between a mother and her child, so it's love-based, and so it's a perfect transition back to the figure. 1,000 years, it was not figurative realism, so they have to actually relearn. They're excavating all these Greek sculptures, and they have to go back to drawing and studying life. Still lifes even, and so we're going to look at paintings, oil paintings. So this image here is, this is all those Madonna and Child paintings. That's the tradition. That is a transitional subject from the medieval period into the Renaissance. The Renaissance is the rebirth of humanism, and this is really important because when you look at the Renaissance, the next period is the Baroque. After that is Neoclassical. And we're going to look at some American buildings because we're in the neoclassical period. That's 1700s, right? 1776 Constitution, you know what I'm saying? So 1700s. And the Romantic is up to around late 1800s. And then we're going to modernism with Impressionism. Very exciting. But this is what's important. You see, stylistically, even though this is like 1400, we're copying the classical Greeks. We go to the Baroque, we're copying the Hellenistic. We go to the Neoclassical, we're copying the classical stylistically. Romantic is Hellenistic. So for 400 years, we keep doing this Greek thing stylistically. And then modernism is, you have the camera, which is around 1826, and the artist was saying, I'm done. I want to paint what I see. And then, which is actually 1850 realism, and then we go to Monet with Expressionism. So this is really important for you to understand stylistically. artistically. So look at this. So here's a Greek classical. There's the spirit bear that you learned, and now you know these words. It's contrapposto. It's not a formal stance. It's informal. It's the S curve, and that the classical Greeks are about what? The ideal. And so he's the proportions, the way that, he's cut. The ideal, and this idea also of, the ideal is restraint, movement. This is all very conceptual. I didn't talk about the undraped figure in this class like I did with humanities, but I may as well address it with Kouros as well as this. The genitalia, that really wasn't important. That's why it's minimalized. It's just like, this is just a guy, there's a man, so, that's not a focal point, so it's just minimalized. It's more about the whole person. And just to make that point. Now, so there's your classical Greek, and that's like 300 BC, and now we're going to the Renaissance, and we're in the around 1400, and there you go. There's Michelangelo's David right there, copying the Greeks. So there is the spirit bear. That's the Greek statue, and this is Michelangelo's David, which is around about 12 feet tall. There's David and Goliath. He's got his slingshot back there, and there's his stone. And that's why David is undraped. We don't say nude, naked, we say undraped. He's undraped. Why is David and Goliath standing there undraped? Because they're copying the Greek classical. It's a celebration of our humanity, everything that makes us human. And so this is during the Renaissance period, when the painters and the sculptors are looking at the classical Greek styles or ideas about what you bring to a work of art. So as you can see, that's classical Greek, right? Well, so this is just some points that I pretty much already have said. Something else happens in the Renaissance. In the medieval period, to see the role of the artist is going to change now, because up until the Renaissance, the artists, even in the medieval period with all these statues, we were blue-collar workers. Just blue-collar workers. Even the Greeks didn't sign their sculptures. I mean, there's a couple, but you're just a skilled worker. By the time you get to the Renaissance, literally you have humanism mixed with religion. All these works, the paintings and the sculptures during the Renaissance, are religious. That's their subject. But the artist also changes. He becomes women weren't trained, so that's why I didn't say she. There are women artists that we study in our department, but you wouldn't. You could talk about them in a survey, but we don't have time for summer school. So what happens, the role of the artist, we become intellectuals, not skilled workers, because these artists are famous. Now you also have fame. Michelangelo was very famous. Da Vinci was very famous. Actually, that was created because of printmaking with Durer, whose work was able to just be taken all over the world because they were prints. So a couple of things happened for the artist's role, which is we became intellectuals instead of blue-collar workers, and you have fame. So that's Michelangelo. And this, of course, is his painting, which is the Sistine Chapel, right here in Rome. And then this is a close-up. This is a close-up of a panel in here. These are frescoes. A fresco is tempera on a plastered wall. Usually, traditionally, it's a wet plastered wall, but you also can have a fresco on a dry wall. And so these are frescoes. And all ancient civilizations did frescoes. They didn't do oil painting. Oil painting isn't discovered until now, during this period by the Northern Europeans. So there you have this very famous, God giving life to Adam. They're touching there, and it's very, very Caucasian. But that is the Sistine Chapel that took many, many years to paint on his back because he's painting upside down. And actually for centuries, because of the oil lamps in there, this was very brown. This was just like layers and layers of soot from the oil lamps. And about 20 years ago, they cleaned it and the colors were very bright. So for centuries, just people saw this dingy, image when actually it was very brightly painted like that. So that's the Sistine Chapel close-up. Also this close-up during the Renaissance by the sculptor Michelangelo. And of course you do have Leonardo da Vinci, and this is the Last Supper. It's actually sort of worn out. That's why it looks sort of worn out. It's a fresco. But now we can really start, on this one, certainly start using some of the terms. We'll continue more in this module. So this is a fresco, and we're going to talk about, this is symmetrical, balance. What is over here is over here. We now have, you see this right here? These windows or forms going back into a point. That's called mathematical perspective. So artists in the Renaissance want to create an illusion of space on these paintings or this fresco because they're two-dimensional, they're flat. And so there's a lot of ways of doing that, overlapping as well as perspective. Mathematical perspective is the where parallel lines converge to a point in real space. So if you're standing on railroad tracks, they get more narrow and become a point as you stand on them, and that's mathematical perspective, and that's how architects draw houses using multiple points of perspective. So you do have that now. That was a discovery, and it is classical. Now, how's it classical? Well, you've got a sense of order and balance. So here, Christ is saying, someone will betray me, and all the apostles are whispering. So all that's going on, but you still sense, because of the perspective, everything converging back behind his head, and also the symmetry, the balance, and also these strong verticals. It's very balanced and a sense of order. And of course, another favorite, not so much favorite, but famous one of his is very small, is the Mona Lisa. This actually is an oil painting, and it, like I said, this is early oil paintings discovered by the Northern Europeans. And the nice thing about oil painting is, with the frescoes, it's very flat and chalky, but with oil painting, it's glazed. And you have this oil that's glazed, layers and layers, and then there's pigments sort of floating in that glaze, and so you have a lot of depth because the light is going through the glazes. But they do crack, and they do crack, and they are problematic. But oil painting was the predominant way to paint until actually the 60s, when we have polymers, when we have acrylic paint. So that is Mona Lisa by Da Vinci in the Renaissance. Now I want to show you these two sculptures, because here you have Michelangelo. There he is. This is the Renaissance. It is restrained, it is classical, and what is this? This is not Renaissance. Too much movement, too much action. That's the next period that follows. That's the Baroque period, and they follow the Hellenistic. So we just keep flip-flopping. And this is also David. But David has some, with the Hellenistic you have movement, so you got this cloth floating around, and he's twisting, and there's a slingshot. And so this was the influence. Here's Hellenistic Greek, laokoon, dramatic subject, action of the figures, diagonal movement, emotional, sensuous. this implicit line here, that's line, but it's implicit. It's implied, that brings the eye down. That's part of how we create balance and lead the viewer, leads you through the piece, is by implicit lines like that. So that's Hellenistic Greek, and that's what the Baroque is about. So again, Renaissance, stylistically, classical Greek. Baroque, stylistically, Hellenistic Greek. And you have all these characteristics in the Baroque. Okay? So there's another viewpoint of David. The twisting, the movement, the drama in his face. And then we go to neo, new. Neo means new. Whoops, I just said that. Oh, I have one more. This is Caravaggio, and he's also Baroque. I forgot I had this. He's another Italian. And Caravaggio is, he's very well known. He was, this painting actually, this is the drama of the death of the Virgin. You've got a lot of diagonals. It looks sort of Renaissance, but it couldn't be Renaissance because you wouldn't have this subject. And actually the death of the Virgin Mary was actually just shocking to people. This work was very shocking because she didn't have any, you saw her bare feet. So there's all these little nuances that the art majors know. But this is, again, this also is during the Baroque period, dramatic use of light sources to create the drama. And so that's Caravaggio, who would actually bring corpses to his studio to be able to study anatomy. This is neoclassical period. And now you can see that's George Washington. And that was in the Capitol building. And it's moved, because they have George Washington looking like Zeus. George Washington is cut here. Look at that nice chest, and he's holding, you know, he's like pontificating, and he's sitting, and that was in the Capitol building for centuries. Again, neoclassical is copying the classical Greeks. So here you have George Washington in that style. Eventually he was moved. I mean, can you see any of our recent presidents? Can you see Barack Obama like this? Can you see George Bush like this? Pick a Democrat and Republican. Well, something else has changed now for the role of the artist and actually the purpose of art. It becomes, you know, it's political. It's about nationalism. So the role of the artist happens there. And this is George Greenough. He's an American. This neoclassical style, and of course the subject is George Washington. The classical style, and actually eventually he was moved. He's in the Natural History Museum, this sculpture, in Washington, D.C., beside a black Packard car. Well, this is where you get all your architectural elements. Like here is the Capitol building, and in DC, neoclassical style. This is 1700 students. This is 1776. You see those years? So all these buildings, all these major buildings, these classical buildings in state capitals, a lot of them look this way, especially in the East. And so you could identify, so there's that Roman, you know, that Roman arch principle, and then you have the temple, all those repeating columns, and we could go on and on. There you've got the arch right there. This is Romanesque in a way. So it's a combination. But it is definitely not Baroque. It is neoclassical because it is repeat, order, order, order. Okay? And that's why we needed to learn the classical Greek and Hellenistic. So I thought this would interest you because this is a statue of Napoleon Bonaparte that he had commissioned. He's standing there undraped. And because Napoleon Bonaparte, the general during the French Revolution, his lifetime spanned the neoclassical and the next style, which we're going to end with, which is Romantic. So the neoclassical is relates to the classical, and the Romantic relates to the Hellenistic. So there he is as the god, Mars, a god, and it's neoclassical. So that's Napoleon Bonaparte. This is Napoleon Bonaparte, a painting he had made of himself in the the Romantic style, which follows the neoclassical. And then you've got flowing things and drama and action. Action is diagonals. Okay? So, surprise, surprise, here's our man. Here's Kehinde Wiley again in 2015. So I just have to jump to the contemporary because he's so interesting, an interesting painter, because he takes these masters, these masterpieces stylistically, and then just puts them himself in it, in a contemporary. He makes the styles contemporary, so he's combining. But this is an excellent little interview with him because, you know, and I want you to watch this because, you know, he talks about he didn't see himself in any of these paintings. All these paintings, when he was a young man going to the museums, he didn't see himself. He didn't see people of color. And so he says, well, I'll just put myself in these paintings. And these are huge paintings. So there he is, Kehinde Wiley as, and now people who know the painting of Napoleon, they would know this. Okay? So that's Wiley doing his thing. This is the last slide. And this is the last image, painting in the module. This is the Romantic period, and this is Raft of the Medusa. It's a true story, and it's by Géricault in French, and we're back in France. By the way, all these styles originated pretty much around in France. France was sort of like the art center, like New York and Berlin is today. A lot of new styles were coming out of there. It's like just a real cultural art center kind of place in Europe. So again, the Romantic is going back to the Hellenistic. So you have a true story here of a drama that actually happened, but you have where these people were actually in a large boat that it was sinking, and so the captain puts them on this raft, over 100, and there's only 20 left. And so you've got all these strong diagonals. Here he's waving to a ship to save them. There are like 20 left. There's cannibalism. There's all this, you know, there's no food. And so this is, again, Hellenistic drama, diagonals, action. And so with this, Géricault is actually, the role of the artist has changed again. He's actually, it's about social commentary. Yep. So he is bringing attention to this. These paintings are huge, by the way, huge paintings. And so now, so here you have this suffering, but when you look closely, like these people, they're still idealized. Like here's this little fella, he's getting ready to pass. He has a little shirt on and a sock, and here you've got this philosopher just sort of sitting there. And so again, it's still, you know, classical, Hellenistic, they're all stylized to be idealized. Real realism comes later. So that's where we end, and we finally, in the last part of the course, can look at modernism and contemporary works and some other, you know, multicultural artists. So this, to me, was the hard part, but getting through this, it's a lot of, well, it's a lot of information. But you need to see how important the Greek, classical, and Hellenistic is, and how we just continue to repeat that flip-flop stylistically. Okay.